Hi sewing friends, welcome to my sewing room. My name is Beth, and if you're new, welcome. Today I'm kind of redoing the last video that I did with you. I made a small table topper, a small quilt with 2 quilt blocks, and someone asked what it would look like if those blocks were bigger. And that got me to thinking, and I wanted to do a little experimenting, and I wanted to find out what would happen if I grew that little table topper to be a bigger size. I didn't think that I would really like that snowball block, because that snowball block got really big to make I think it's a 10-inch block or 10.5-inch block. So what I did, instead of using a 1.5-inch square to start with, I used a 2.5-inch square to make my blocks, and I started from there. A couple of the other measurements, of course, change. So I'm going to make a blue quilt, the same pattern, just a little bit bigger. Let's get started. Here's what I need for my block. I need a lot of 2.5-inch squares. So for the farmer's daughter, I chose some dark blues, and I need 13 of those dark blues and 8 of the background. I'm forgetting to show you another piece for that farmer's daughter quilt block, but I'll show that in a minute. This is for the snowball quilt block. I need some large squares, and my squares are 5.5 inches. All this information will be down below. I'll be making 4 of each block, and this is what I have left over, and hopefully the next video I'll talk about this quilter's harvest. So here I'm starting to make my farmer's daughter quilt block, and I need to start by making a 9-patch. And if you go back to my previous video, I show you how to make this with 1.5-inch squares. These are 2.5-inch squares, just 1 inch larger, and it is just incredible what happens when you change your numbers and you just move it up 1 inch. Here's that other piece that I forgot to mention. It is 2.5 inches by 6.5 inches, and I need 4 of these for my farmer's daughter quilt block. And what I did is I took my square and I put it on each end and put a seam right down the middle. If you need to, you can mark that line, but I just went from corner to corner to cover one of those ends of that strip with a triangle. And I will trim away my excess, and after a few of these I realized I could be making some leftover triangles, half square triangles here, and I slowed down just a little bit and started adding another seam, and I'll show you in a minute how I made more half square triangles. After adding my longer strips to 2 sides of my 9-patch, I added 2.5-inch square with the background fabric to the other 2 longer strips, and then I will add these star points to the other 2 sides of my quilt block. Here's the second block I'll be making in this little quilt. I am using 5.5-inch squares, and 4 of those, and 2 2.5-inch squares for each of the larger squares. So I need 8 of those 2.5-inch background squares, and I sew them to both sides of my larger square from corner to corner, and these background squares will kind of cover those 2 corners of this square. I'll have some excess. I'll press that open and sew the 4 squares together. I'm really pleased I was able to use one of my favorite fabric sources, and this background fabric is from an old cotton sheet that this is really the end of that sheet, which is kind of sad because I really like this fabric with the tiny green leaves and the little pink berries. It's really pretty, and I didn't even have enough to finish this quilt, but I enjoyed using this pretty sheet. Thankfully, I had another cotton sheet that's similar but not the same that I used for the rest of my blocks when I ran out of this pretty background fabric. This is when I remembered to add a second seam so that when I'm done I will have those leftover half square triangles. I just put a seam a little shy of a 1/2 inch away from my first seam, and then I was able to cut between the 2 seams, and I will have some half square triangles for a future project. Once I had my blocks done, I put them together in rows, put the rows together, and my quilt top was ready to go. And here is my blue quilt next to the quilt I made last time. I think it's so interesting how that 1 inch difference in that first little block we started with can make such a huge difference. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.